Well, hello again. Welcome to Horror in Detail. Today we are going to share Wendigo horror stories. First story. This story was shared by you/Chillinangodzillan. Wendigo Encounter. Hi, so this is my first post on Reddit. I just wanted to share this story and see if something like this has ever happened to anyone else. Just to start off with some backstory. My group of friends had started making a nasty habit of joking about the Wendigo. My friend Stacy and me didn't for a while just due to the fact we believed in the supernatural, but after a few months it grew on us, and not knowing that the Wendigo can actually be triggered by such things, we joined in. Biggest mistake ever. I had just moved into the country, and we enjoyed making trips into town to have a few drinks, which is about a 30-minute walk from my place to town. At night, the first 10 minutes after leaving the bridge that leads out of town is pitch darkness with no street lights. After that, street lights are very sparsely places, which can cause for a very creepy walk back without anything happening. So with that all in place, let's continue. Stacy and I begin our night, walking into town. Get some beers. And have some fun. Shortly into the night, something slightly strange happens. We receive a phone call from her little sister at home, crying and scared because she saw someone sitting on my friend Stacy's bed. She calms her sister down and asks her cousin to check her room for her sister at home. Everything is fine. No one's in the room. Also, ghosts and weird things happening at her house were very common, so a sighting like this was strangely regular. We continue our night. Into the night, we meet a guy who seems pretty cool. He's riding a bike and tells us he's pretty drunk or something. We decide to hang with him for a bit, wanting to meet people in town. A ways into our hangout, we are sitting on a park bench and the guy is laying on the ground in front of us. Suddenly my friend stands up and says it's time for us to go. I shrug and agree, and we get going. After getting away from him, she tells me how the guy bit her ankle the day after she had teeth bruises on her ankle. Kind of flustered the guy would do that, we continue our walk out of town. Finally, we pass the bridge, which is our last source of light for the next 10 minutes. We turn on our phone flashlights, and we turn on some music, trying to ease the spooky feeling of being in pitch darkness in the middle of nowhere. Suddenly we hear a voice beside us. We both jump. It's the same guy on his bike. He asks us if he can follow us until we reach the fork in the road. We need to go left and he needs to go right. Still slightly creeped out, but almost at the street lights and the fork in the road, we agree. Regardless, he had to go that way, and so did we. After a bit of walking, we finally reach the fork in the road, and the first street light. We sigh with relief, hoping he would leave. But he turns down our way instead of going the way he needs to go. Now at this point, we are thoroughly creeped out. We try to ignore it and keep walking, holding our breaths, wanting to reach the next street light, which is some ways away. Finally, after what felt like forever, we reach the next street light, which is also for some reason a small graveyard. I hate my area. Once we reach the street light, the guy stops dead in his tracks and doesn't move any further past it. As we turn around, the guy looks like he has suddenly passed out on his bike, his head down and shoulders slumped. I was about to say something to him, but my friend stopped me and said we really needed to leave him. I agreed, not wanting to be around him much longer either. After a few seconds, I take a peek over my shoulder. He's gone, vanished. The worst part is, even if he had turned around and started pedaling as fast as he could, we still would have been able to see him some ways down the road. I panicked, but also slightly relieved he wasn't there anymore. We continue walking, trying to pretend we aren't creeped out. walking quickly from street light to street light. Finally, we reach my driveway. My driveway is a long road of darkness. We hadn't put any lights in yet to try and brighten it. We began to walk slowly, holding our breath, some weird feeling of dread coming over me the closer and closer we got to my house and the further into the driveway we entered. I don't know what came over us, but the sudden feeling of you need to run. And you need to run fast came over us at the same time. We took of bolting at the exact same time without having to say a word to each other. We got to my front door. I unlocked it quicker than I ever have before. We get inside. Just as I'm about to close the door, this hellish scream or growl, whatever the sound, has come out of nowhere. I could hear it getting close to the door and steps. I slammed the door closed and locked it, and dropping to the ground in fear. We both sat there holding our breaths, scared to even breathe. Fast forward a couple weeks, me and my Stacy had forgotten about what happened. Suddenly it came up in convo and we tried to find the sound we heard. Nothing worked. We looked up every possible animal, even animals that weren't likely. We spent an hour on this, until we decided to look up the sound of a Wendigo. It was the only sound that fit perfectly. We don't joke or talk about it now. I hate to. Even writing this post made me feel scared to bring it up. Once again, this is my first post ever, so be gentle on me. Shocked. I just really curious to hear if anyone had something like that happen to them. I also posted the link below of the sound we heard. The sound is on the very first clip. Also, I apologize for the length of this. Second story. This story was shared by you/Ronandog. My grandfather saw a skinwalker. My grandfather told me a story once, as we sat around a campfire in his backyard, in the cool night of the Arizona desert. The horizon was clear, and each star twinkled in a purple sky, with a full fat moon hanging low over the mountains. His voice was raspy and gravelly, the result of a lifetime of smoking cigars and drinking whiskey. The fire danced and shined across his wide dark eyes, as he settled into his seat, ready to tell his story. Way back when I was a boy, about your age, he began, I lived outside an Apache reservation, with your great-grandfather. He had returned from the war, and set about raising horses and cattle, on 100-acre ranch settled between a brambly mountainside, with dirt good for growing thorn brush and not much else. One night, my mother was sick, and Pa and I took a trip into town, about 50 miles away, straight through a dry desert, over a washed-out creek, and some old abandoned farmsteads. The fire sparked, and a log cracked, jolting me out of the story. What next? I asked. Settle down, boy, you'll hear soon enough. Pa and I were driving in an old Ford pickup truck. I remember it was dark out, inky and thick, with only the lights of our old truck lighting up the road. I remember, too, when the engine began to sputter, and the truck slowed to a jerky stop. God damn it, Pa said, guiding the Ford to the side of the road, as it coasted to a halt. Stay here, son, as he stepped out into the darkness, shutting the door with a heavy thud. My window was down, and the cool desert air was breezy and felt good on my hot face and neck. Pa was getting water from the back to cool the engine, and that's when I smelled it. Rotten eggs. Strange, I thought, to smell sulfur in the desert. My nose also picked up carrion, like one of them dead bloated cattle that would drop from the heat, and lay there, until the crows pecked enough holes in their hide to cause the whole thing to explode. It stunk, and I gagged. My skin started to tingle too, the back of my neck felt itchy, and my face started to get hot. The wind stopped blowing, and hung still and heavy, with the stink filling the cab. "Pa," I called. "Pa, PA." No answer. My heart started beating, and I felt such a fear in me, in my bones, in my chest. Boy, I tell you, I never felt fear like this, not until Vietnam, not until I saw men dying around me. I locked the door, and reached over for my pa door, and saw a shadow bound across the road, through both dim beams of light, across the partly open domed hood. Grandfather paused. He spit a fat wad of tobacco spit off to his side, and he looked pensively into the darkness. I realized I was holding my breath, and gasped for air. The night was cool, but I was sweating and clammy. "Well? What happened? What about your father? What did you see?" He sighed. "A creature." He shook his head. "You have to understand, there were legends, older than the rock cairns out in the valley, older still than Crazy Horse, and Sitting Bull, than the old Injun chiefs and their shamans. The Apache, and Hapa, and Cherokee, and all them old tribes and First Peoples, they told tales, old stories, about dark Injun magic, a deal made with the old spirits, of blood sacrifice, to gain power, old power, enough to fight each other, and the Spaniards, and later the white men that came for their land and women. They called them." He paused. Grandfather took a deep breath, and bodied forward into his tale. Across the fire, and the sky, the desert, the creek, the moon, the sun, and old mountains, he bodied forward. They called them skinwalkers. Shape-changers. Old warriors resurrected as skinless men, all sinew and muscle, walking on deer legs, with the torso of a man, and the head of a coyote. But messed up, boy, long and malformed snouts. Teeth like a bowie knife. Long arms, and standing 7 foot, even hunched over. They'd got the old cowboys, and white riders, they'd run through bullets and sabers, part the Spanish armor like it was a potato sack. Wily too, they could change their voice to match a person you knew, or might know. Boy, that's what I saw. Big, and fast, only for a second, it ran across the road. Gray and mottled. Muscle flexing under its legs, hooves clomping on the road, stringy muscled hunched shoulders. And it turned. Looked right into the cab, looked right into my eyes, and I swear, boy, I swear it grinned at me. I sank into my seat, in shock, in fear, shaking. I knew death was near. The air was electric, I smelled ozone, and brimstone. The air felt like right before the lightning comes, and blows a tree to smithereens. Charged and full with power. I yelled for my pa, but no words came out, just a dry squeak. I was shaking, as grandfather told his story. He was still here, so I know he lived, but the supernatural always fascinated me, and even now, I felt the force of his words. The real power of skinwalkers was trickery. Sure, they could change their voices, but also their skin. That's why the gods took their hide. So they could take others. Not for long, the legends say. Maybe an hour, before the soul of the skin they wore would come looking for their mortal shell before going to whatever hell awaited them. Though I think that getting skinned alive was hell enough. A minute passed in what felt like a lifetime, 1 second in 1,000 years. My father's door opened, and I jerked my head to the left, putting my fists up to fend off attack. "Son, it's me," my father said, before climbing into the cab. He grasped the steering wheel and pulled himself in awkwardly, jerking himself into the seat. I cringed into the corner. I looked at him. I looked hard. Boy, your great-grandfather was a good man, treated me and my ma right. He fought the Nazis and saw the worst of man in Poland when he freed all them camps. And now I was taking his measure. Is this my father? Do I make a run or do I die? Is it him or not? Let's go get that medicine for your ma, as he pulled the truck into gear, and pulled it out onto the road, and our trip resumed. I guess it was him after all. But how did you know? Was it because he said something about your mom? No, boy, I knew, because out the window, out the corner of my eye, I seen that beast running 50 miles an hour right next to the car, looking at me with them yellow eyes and grinning mouth. I looked and saw it, hunched and angry, running next us, boy. My pa kept his eyes on the road, locked straight forward. Son, he said, don't look at it, don't look at it. That's how I knew, boy. Third story. This story was shared by you/braced polecat. Story of the Wendingo. The Wendingo, a wealthy man, wanted to go hunting in a part of northern Canada where few people had ever hunted. He traveled to a trading post and tried to find a guide to take him. But no one would do it. It was too dangerous, they said. Finally, he found an Indian who needed money badly, and he agreed to take him. The Indian's name was Defago. They made camp in the snow near a large frozen lake. For 3 days they hunted, but they had nothing to show for it. The third night a windstorm came up. They lay in their tent listening to the wind howling and the trees whipping back and forth. To see the storm better, the hunter opened the tent flap. What he saw startled him. There wasn't a breath of air stirring, and the trees were standing perfectly still. Yet he could hear the wind howling. And the more he listened, the more it sounded as if it were calling Defago's name. Defago, it called. Defago. I must be losing my mind, the hunter thought. But Defago had gotten out of his sleeping bag. He was huddled in a corner of the tent, his head buried in his arms. What's this all about? The hunter asked. It's nothing, Defago said. But the wind continued to call to him. And Defago became more tense and restless. Defago, it called. Defago. Suddenly, he jumped to his feet, and he began to run from the tent. But the hunter grabbed him and wrestled him to the ground. You can't leave me out here, the hunter shouted. Then the wind called again, and Defago broke loose and ran into the darkness. The hunter could hear him screaming as he went. Again and again he cried, "Oh, my fiery feet, my burning feet of fire." Then his voice faded away, and the wind died down. At daybreak, the hunter followed Defago's tracks in the snow. They went through the woods, down toward the lake, then out into the ice. But soon he noticed something strange. The steps Defago had taken got longer and longer. They were so long no human being could have taken them. It was as if something had helped him to hurry away. The hunter followed the tracks out to the middle of the lake, but there they disappeared. At first he thought that Defago had fallen through the ice, but there wasn't any hole. Then he thought that something had pulled him off the ice into the sky. But that made no sense. As he stood wondering what had happened, the wind picked up again. Soon it was howling as it had the night before. Then he heard Defago's voice. It was coming from up above, and again he heard Defago screaming. My fiery feet, my burning feet. But there was nothing to be seen. Now the hunter wanted to leave that place as fast as he could. He went back to camp and packed. Then he left some food for Defago, and he started out. Weeks later he reached civilization, The following year he went back to hunt in that area again. He went to the same trading post to look for a guide. The people there could not explain what had happened to Defago that night. But they had not seen him since then. Maybe it was the Wendigo, one of them said, and he laughed. It's supposed to come with the wind. It drags you along at great speed until your feet are burned away, and more of you than that. Then it carries you into the sky, and it drops you. It's just a crazy story, but that's what some of the Indians say. A few days later the hunter was at the trading post again. An Indian came in and sat by the fire. He had a blanket wrapped around him, and he wore his hat so that you couldn't see his face. The hunter thought there was something familiar about him. He walked over and he asked, "Are you Defago?" The Indian didn't answer. "Do you know anything about him?" No answer. He began to wonder if something was wrong, if the man needed help. But he couldn't see his face. "Are you all right?" he asked. To get a look at him, he lifted the Indian's hat. Then he screamed. There was nothing under the hat but a pile of ashes. Fourth story. This story was shared by you/Mverick113. I think I had a Wendigo outside my bedroom window. Okay, so first of all, this is a legit story, and no one will tell me otherwise. Also, I'm not that good at writing, so fair warning. Okay, so this is how it went. I was sitting in my room playing video games at like 1 a.m. and then someone started to call my name from outside my window, and it sounded just like my grandma's voice. I was 16, and living with my grandparents at my great-grandparents' home. Got our house sold out from under us, so we had to move into my great-grandma's home, and it was trying to persuade me into coming outside, and I knew it wasn't my grandma since it was talking differently than how my grandma would have tried to persuade me. It said something like this: "Hey, name here, come outside, I have something to show you, just come here please." But when I didn't respond, it started to tap violently on my window saying, "Why won't you come outside?" But after a while of not responding, it went away. Also note that there's a forest in our backyard with a railroad, and it was also in the middle of winter, and I didn't know what it was until I heard about the Wendigo after I searched up a bit. I'm sorry if I typed incorrectly or anything. I'm not that great at grammar when typing or writing. Also, this is a real story because now I'm actually traumatized by that experience, and I'll never go near a forest in the middle of winter for the rest of my life. Also, ATM, my house is being sold again a year later, and we are moving back to my great-grandparents' house again, but thank God it's summer. But also there are more paranormal experiences that I've had in that house, but those are stories for another time. I just wanted to share my experience with the world. Fifth story. This story was shared by you/GravelyMave. Something was watching me from the tree outside my second story window. I have the same routine at the end of every day. Shower, smoke a joint, scroll through Reddit, go to bed. After a long day at work, I got home and hopped in the shower. I work as an ER nurse in my city's local hospital, so by the time I get home, I'm basically sprinting to the bathroom to wash off the day's grime. It's a messy job. Not only physically, but it makes your mind a mess too. Working in the emergency department comes with seeing your fair share of traumatic things. To list a few, I've seen severe workplace injuries ranging from sawed-off fingers, crushed limbs, to someone being impaled on a metal pole. I've seen people who have been in car accidents, and even a man who failed his suicide attempt with a shotgun. I suppose you could say I'm desensitized to things that would cause your average person to faint. I'm a tough woman, but what happened tonight has shaken me to my core, and I don't know what the fuck to do. I hope someone on here can give me some advice or insight. After my shower, I changed into my pajamas and pulled out the joint I rolled earlier. I don't smoke inside because I have animals, so I put my jacket on and headed out to the porch. I rent a 2-story house by myself on the outskirts of town, almost in the country. The closest neighbor I have is about half a mile away from me, so I don't worry about bothering anyone with the smell. It really feels good to be able to smoke after work and try to forget about some of the things I see on a daily basis. Today, the paramedics brought in a family who was in a horrible car accident. All 3 of them were pronounced dead on arrival. Their daughter was 5. I needed to smoke to get their faces out of my head, and with every puff, they started to fade. I finished up my joint and headed upstairs to my room, shutting off the lights and getting into bed. My German Shepherd, Rex, took his place next to me as usual. For about an hour I scrolled through Reddit, giving myself some entertainment before I had to go to bed to get enough sleep for work tomorrow. I was watching a video when I heard scratching on the tree just outside my window. I chalked it up to it most likely being a squirrel climbing the tree, which wasn't unusual at all considering there is a lot of wildlife around my house. A couple minutes later, I heard it again. Except this time, it was more like scraping instead of scratching. I started to get anxious, but I honestly thought it was just the fact that I was high and getting paranoid. I got off my phone and faced the other direction, snuggling up to Rex to try to get some sleep. You know that irrational thought you get where you start feeling super uneasy and it feels like someone's watching you? I started to feel that way. For 20 minutes I laid in bed with my back facing the window and could not shake the feeling of eyes watching me. I probably wouldn't have felt this way if it weren't for the fact that my window was open to get some cool air in my room. However, paranoid, anxious, and high me tried to ignore it. I almost fell asleep when I heard quiet scratching at my window. I started panicking and forced myself to get up to close the window and the curtains. Once I got to the window, I saw something. Not someone, something. I don't know how to describe it without sounding fucking insane, but there was something perched up in the tree branches outside my bedroom window. It looked like a naked man, but it wasn't a man. Its skin was white like a ghost and the facial features weren't quite distinguishable. Its eyes looked so fucking hollow and empty. Its mouth was shut, but it almost looked like the skin was melted shut and rotting away. The thing was emaciated. Its face was sunken in. It genuinely looked like it was skin and bones. I have never screamed so loudly in my life. I slammed the window shut, locked it, and ripped the curtain shut. I ran across the room and hid behind my bed. Rex was growling at the window, just staring. I grabbed my phone over the bed and called the police, telling the woman that a man was in the tree watching me from my window. I had to tell them it was a man because I felt like they would think it was a prank call and not send anyone. 15 minutes later, an officer showed up and searched the property. They didn't find anyone, and the thing in the tree was gone. Since no one was there, the officer gave me a card with his number on it and told me to call if I see or hear anything suspicious. He left and I hurried back inside. I'm terrified to look out my window. I can't fucking sleep. Rex is on edge. I have to be up for work in 4 hours and I am wide awake in fear. I don't know what to do. I don't have a gun. I don't know many people. Seems I just moved here about 6 months ago and work has taken up so much of my time that I don't have any left to socialize. I just peeked out the window and I swear to God I saw something white crouched over in the tree line in the distance. I am losing my mind. 6th story. This story was shared by u/Shermsticks1126. What was this creature? I was catching up with a childhood friend the other day, and he brought up an encounter we had years ago that I haven't thought about in a while. We were 12 and playing manhunt with our friends late at night. We lived in a heavily wooded area in New England and had created a fairly extensive network of trails that went pretty deep into the woods over the years. Since it was pitch black in those woods, we would run around with flashlights, only turning them off to hide from the hunters. One night my friend was chasing me down one of the trails with his flashlight on and mine's off in hopes I could slip behind a tree to evade him. At an intersection of two trails, I made a sharp left down a trail we had just recently added to our network and was almost immediately met by what I initially thought to be another hunter. I tried to make a sharp cut off the trail to evade the second hunter, but slipped and got tagged out by the initial hunter. As I was getting up, I looked to see who the other hunter was who cut off my escape and quickly realized that it was none of my friends. The creature looking back at us stood on four legs, towering over us at about 7 feet tall, with its front legs longer than its hind legs, which also seemed to be bent backwards. It was completely devoid of hair of any kind, and its skin was a pale green hue, almost like it was decaying off. Its eyes glowed yellow in the light of the flashlight, with a face that seemed almost human in an uncanny way. Both my friend and I stood frozen for what felt like an hour before sprinting out of the woods as fast as possible, not looking back even once to see if we were being pursued. After that encounter, neither of us dared enter those woods for a solid month. Now my initial thoughts is that we saw a deer with some sort of horrible disease, although what we saw did not resemble any of the thousands of deer I'd ever encountered prior to that experience, nor in the decades since. I have since dug deep into cryptid sightings in that area and again was unable to find anything that resembled the description of the creature we encountered. Does anyone have any suggestions, both natural or paranormal in nature, that could perhaps help describe what we both saw that night? 7th story. This story was shared by /Onyx_Ox. I think my mom was cursed by a Wendigo. TW, mentions of animal abuse/dismemberment. Every family member of mine, including myself, has had an encounter with the paranormal or supernatural at one point in their lives. From the little people that kept my great-aunt company as she lay dying in a hospital bed to myself making successful contact with something through a Ouija board. But this I don't have an explanation for. Even as someone who believes in these things, I always try to ration the mundane over the magical. However, after delving into learning more about a certain mythological cryptid, I can only come to one conclusion surrounding my mother's passing in the spring of this year. I used to live in the mountains in Northern California with my mom, who was a single mother, and the place we stayed at was a house that was owned by my aunt. It was a historical house with well over 200 years of history on the property, and being rebuilt and altered through the decades. This house was situated in the thick of the wooded mountain and forest stretched for miles beyond. In the front ward was a wall about 3 feet high, and on top was a hill that inclined upwards back some 10 yards of grass that terminated at a fence. Beyond that was just woods and a small hiking trail. When we moved into this house, I was just starting 1st grade, and what I'm about to tell of has been happening regularly until we moved out when I was in middle school. My mom was also deeply spiritual and also believed in the supernatural, though I don't think they knew what she had possibly encountered. When I was sent off to school, my mom stayed back at the house to do paperwork for an ongoing custody battle. When she was alone or when I was out of sight was when it started happening. She would hear my voice shouting for her from the front yard, yet she knew that I was not home at that time, nor would I have been. The first few times it happened, she wrote it off as her hearing things, since she is hard of hearing in one ear. The longer we lived there, the more seemingly uncomfortable things we would feel or experience. I had never liked that house. I always felt like I was being watched in one way or another. Especially outside, coming from just beyond the property fence. A few times she was with some family friends out on the back porch that overlooked some sparse patches of forest and the valley. She would invite them over when I was at school still so that she can focus of relaxing. That's when she heard my voice again, calling to her from the wooded patch. This time her friends also heard it. Confused, they asked my mom, shouldn't I have been at school at that time, and why was I playing outside in the woods? I wasn't, she told them that. At the same time, around the times that my mom supposedly heard my voice, a foul smell would linger around the property. When I would come home, or find my mom if I was off inside the house, my mom would keep asking me if I was really at school today and I didn't just skip school. I always answered honestly that I was at school. The most vivid memory that my mom had of an encounter with an unwelcome friend on/around our property was one night in 2014, when I was in 4th grade, a magnitude 6 earthquake hit an adjacent county. Our property was very close to that county, and she was literally shaken awake. Note, the bedroom we were sleeping in had the bed right next to a glass sliding door that faced to the backyard. She tried to wake me up, but I was a heavy sleeper. Then, she smelled that foul scent again. 2 yellow eyes in our backyard caught her eyes. As she stared at this intruder in our backyard, the aftershock hit. Thankfully, we were far enough away from the epicenter that the only damage done to the property was a crack in the tiles of the backyard deck and also along the floor surrounding a pool we had. Another incident was that we used to keep chickens for eggs for a few months. We had the family handyman build an automatic closing coop so that the door would close just before sunset, to keep the chickens safe from mountain lions and other things that would eat chickens. Along with a metal fenced, not the chicken wire kind, but the heavy-duty ones that are used in construction sites, coop on all sides including the top to keep out the mountain lions, since a few were recently spotted north the nearby regional park. This was something that came from my own memory. At first it was just one chicken that ended up drowned at the bottom of our pool. After that we put a padlock on the gate to the coop. Then one late morning I was out hunting for frogs in the pool filter when I saw my aunt, mom, and family handyman, the same one that built the coop, look at the coop shocked and worried. The metal fencing of the coop of one safe had been completely ripped open, and inside the coop was a bloodbath. I came to take a closer look at the scene when I heard the handyman say, "I'm not sure this was a mountain lion. None of the chicken are eaten or missing. Their heads are all severed, and a mountain lion would have eaten these. They don't hunt and kill for fun." We also had no neighbors or people for at least a few miles that could have played this prank on us. And the thing I remember most was not the dismembered chickens, but the smell of rotting flesh, even though the chicken looked like they were just killed the night before. Looking back, it felt like we were being taunted by this thing. Or at least my mom was, for some reason. When we still lived at that house, and even after we moved, misfortune followed us wherever we went. My mom got into a 5-year-long abusive relationship and developed breast cancer when I was in high school. She was a very healthy woman with no family history of breast cancer, and it would go away and come back just when she thought she was finally done with the chemo and treatment and all that. I had at some point in my teens gotten into cryptids, and specifically Native American folklore. If what I assume about her experiences are correct, I have heard that even if you evade death by the Wendingo, it will find another way to kill you. Doctors she would visit would express confusion as she was low risk in getting breast cancer, let alone having it keep coming back since they caught it early the first time. Though we had long left that house, it felt like the memories, the fear, it was always following her. In her last months alive when I was with her, she said she kept having dreams of that old house. Of my voice from beyond the woods, beckoning for her to come. Dreams about a thing that looked like a man but wasn't exactly, bearing the same yellow glowing eyes she saw outside the night of the earthquake. She felt as if these reoccurring dreams were trying to tell her something. She had hoped it was something good and not malevolent. In fact, it did have my voice after all. Last year in the fires, the house burnt down. And this year in the spring, my mom passed away. Looking back, it feels like the pieces fit together for this. Everything from her diagnosis to how her cancer had behaved felt so off. It could be that she was cursed by this thing. Or maybe there was no supernatural explanation. But it still lingers in the back of my mind. 8th story. This story was shared by you/mundane_plastic_8024. Bird over Chernobyl. My mother's name is Vera Valerievna Kamenko. She just turned 83 this year. My name is Vanna Andreevna Kamenko. I turned 36 this year, and I currently work as a particle physicist. I was raised in Ukraine and then went to school in America at MIT, where I also did my graduate training. The same year I was awarded a prestigious research position in Switzerland. The doctors diagnosed her with Alzheimer's, and the disease only progressed further. I've been losing a bit of my mother every day since. However, there's one thing she still remembers vividly to this day, and when I would help her bathe in the evening, she would grab my arm and tell me about the great catastrophe. Before the diagnosis, she would never mention what happened, though I was always curious. I was too young to remember, as I was still an infant, and everything I know came from what I learned in school and in documentaries. Nowadays, I would get little bits and pieces of what she and my father, who I never met, had to endure during that time. The following was collected and stitched together from my recollections of over a year of her telling me her story, little by little. She was 48 when the great catastrophe happened. The year was 1986. I was born in Pripyat, Ukraine. My mother was a pediatric hematologist working at Pripyat City Hospital No. 26, located at Druzhby-Neredov Street on the outskirts of Pripyat. She was a woman of sparkling intelligence, having scored the highest on her board exams in the oblast, which according to her was what made my father, a fireman, fall in love with her a decade before. I was born in 1985, and for the year after, my mother was on her paid maternity to care for me. She told me that she began having nightmares beginning in March. It was terrifying, she recounted in Russian as I bathed her one night. Your father found me screaming and sweating. He asked me, "What's wrong, Vera?" And I was screaming, "The smoke. Andre, the smoke and the fire, and the people's faces disfigured and peeling from burns, Andre. I saw hell. Your father took me the rest of the night to calm down. I was so exhausted I could barely get up to nurse you, darling." My mother told me that she would get these nightmares repeatedly. It was more or less the same thing, a hellscape of smoke and fire with people's skins burning off and peeling like burnt paper. In our apartment complex, we soon found out that she wasn't the only one having that same exact nightmare. The neighbors who worked at the power plant also reported having these terrifying dreams. Yuri, who worked at the power plant, his wife told me over coffee one day that his husband has been waking up, screaming at night. I told her, what a silly thought. A grown man, screaming like a child at night? But she was completely serious. What her husband had dreamt, there was a look of sheer terror on his face that she never wanted to see again. When she told me what he dreamt of, the smoke and fire, I told her, "That's strange." That was what I had dreamt of the night before and the week before that. The dreams became so intense that my father recommended she see a psychiatrist. When I went to the psychiatrist, Dr. Sitnikoff I believe, he wrote me a prescription for some benzodiazepine for my nerves. As I was about to leave the office with the prescription, he said to me, "You know, it's strange that you had that dream. I've had people come to me this week describing the same nightmare you just described to me." I said, "Really? Has Yuri come to see you as well?" And he responded, "Not just Yuri. 7 other men from Chernobyl have come to see me as well." What was strange was that by the second week of April, the nightmares suddenly stopped. That's when the phone calls began. One day while your father was at work, the phone rang. When I picked it up, nobody spoke. What I could hear was breathing, heavy breathing. I said into the phone, "Who is this? Is this a prank? Please don't call back." However, the phone calls came every other day. It was just 20 seconds of heavy breathing, no words, and then whoever was on the other end would just hang up. The next weekend, while she was driving home with my father from the cinema, she saw something that caught her eye in the distance. It was something floating above the trees. I couldn't see it very clearly from the car window. From the distance, it looked tiny, but if you factor in how far it was away, that thing must have been humongous, with the wings the size of a small building, or maybe a bus. I remember that it instilled this primal fear and dread within me. I said to your father, "Look, Andre, I think there's something over there, above the trees." He said, "Over there? That's where the power plant is." He wouldn't believe me that I saw the winged bird with glowing red eyes flying circles around one of the towers. He dismissed me as being a woman with her delusions. But I knew what I saw. Yuri's wife reported that he had seen the same thing walking one night to the bus from work. Yuri's wife, she said to me, "Yuri's been saying he's seeing this gremlin, some kind of giant winged bat with red eyes floating circles around block number 4. I tell you, he's playing some kind of game." I said to him, "A giant winged bat with glowing eyes?" "Yeah, right, and I saw Baba Yaga at the shops last night." But he was completely serious, even scared. My mother remembers the morning of April 26, 1986, clearly, as though it was yesterday. "I remember that night you wouldn't stop crying, so I was up at 1 in the morning trying to get you to sleep. It was a little before the half hour, and I suddenly felt the ground moving like an earthquake. It startled me so much that I nearly fell back. I feared there was a war that started, or maybe the Americans had dropped a bomb on us, so I ran to the window. I could see that coming from Chernobyl was this bright flash that quickly faded. Dogs were barking like mad around the neighborhood, and when the light faded, I could see this blue, glowing beam that just shot straight up into the sky like floodlights. My mother then got a call at 6 o'clock the next morning from the chief physician at the hospital. Dr. Vitali was on the phone, and he said to me, "Comrade Dr. Kamenko, I understand you are on maternity leave, but something has happened. There's been an influx of patients from the power plant, and we are short on doctors and nurses. We need all the help we can get. I had to leave you with Yuri's wife while I grabbed my white coat and purse and left for the hospital. When I got to the hospital, it was bedlam. There were ambulances and people everywhere. People were helping men up the stairs. Some of the men collapsed on the stairs and were vomiting. They were still hauling people up on stretchers from the ambulances. When I got into the hospital, I could barely move through the doors. They were so crammed full of people. I said to Paulina, a nurse that was walking in with me, "Where did all these people come from?" "Something happened at the power plant last night," she whispered. "What? Was that what I felt?" I said to her. And she said, "Yes, I think there was an accident." Everywhere in the halls were men from the plant, still in their uniforms, with burned, soot faces and arms. It was a ghastly sight. I was treating this young fireman, and I recognized that his arms and face were covered in radiation burns. He was groaning in such pain and sweating so profusely. I asked him, "Where the hell were you to receive these radiation burns?" He could barely answer me, that poor fellow. He looked so feverish. I was putting out the fire. "We need to get these clothes off of you immediately." "Nurse!" I yelled. I waved to the nurses and they came and took the boots and coat off of the man. They then took them to the basement of the hospital to throw away. As they took off his jacket, I realized that he was in the same company as your father. I went to the head nurse and asked, "Have you seen Andrei? Andrei Yukimovich Kamenko?" A nurse behind her raised her hand and said, "Yes, I've seen Comrade Kamenko. He's in the burn ward in 28. I ran down the halls and up the stairs. Your father was lying in a room filled with other firemen and power plant workers. By then, they had set up these blue plastic curtains, and I had to go in to touch his skin. His skin was marbled and red, and they felt oily and damp with blood and sweat, and his lips were so swollen. The white sheets were stained yellow from his body. He looked like the horribly disfigured faces I had seen in my nightmares weeks before. He could barely breathe, and he just wheezed. He was in so much pain. At this moment, my mother fell silent and began to weep. "Mamachka, it's okay. You don't have to keep on going." Her eyes welled with tears. She sniffled, then continued. He couldn't even turn his head. I was there and I said to him, "Andrei, my beloved Andrei, look at you, what have they done to you?" And he spoke so hoarsely. Every word was painful, I could tell. "Vera, my dear, you look pretty today. The rocks, they were so hot and I'm afraid my hands are pretty burnt. How's my baby Vanna?" I remember that I grabbed his hand and smiled, though tears fell from my face. Vanna couldn't stop crying last night. She was crying for you, her papachka. "Don't worry," he said, coughing up blood. "Papachka will be home soon." He was delirious from the morphine. I was called back into duty soon after. That was the last time I saw him. The nurses told me he passed away a few hours later. We were later told on the state news on television that it was only a minor accident. Some block had been damaged on the roof of the power plant, and that rumors of a disaster were lies propagated by Western media. But I knew what I saw. I knew what took your father. It was like whatever had happened weeks before, the nightmares, the phone calls, that thing that flew over the power station. It was a foreboding, a harbinger of the hell that was to come. I know it. Yuri knew it too. He had been getting the same phone calls, and saw the same flying bird. I was lucky though. I heard from his wife a while later that he had died from the poisoning painfully and slowly several months after the disaster. Your father's body had not even touched the ground when we were told to leave Pripyat for a temporary evacuation. On the streets, we saw these long lines of buses. There were soldiers everywhere, and men and women with strollers with babies, and schoolchildren. They were military trucks with speakers and this woman's voice telling us to close our windows and turn off our taps. There were other trucks with these men in white suits that covered up their entire bodies, and they were spraying the streets with water. I packed our belongings in a single suitcase, and with you in a stroller, we left our apartment block on Druzhby Narrative for the buses for Kiev. We never returned. My mother still kept my father's picture, him in an Ushanka with a red star and his uniform, by her nightstand. The walnut frame was always dusted and maintained in a pristine state. I had never heard about what happened to him growing up, only that he died even before I learned to walk. A while after, I had decided to move my mother in with me to Geneva, Switzerland, where my new job was. You see, I was part of a multinational CERN-affiliated team that was conducting research on the origins of gravity and mass from quantum mechanics using microscopic black holes in the underground tunnels of the Large Hadron Collider. In my first week, I decided to take my mother on a free tour of the laboratories. I pushed her in a wheelchair as we went through the tour. She nodded along with the tour guide, and I pointed to where the white coat scientists were busy configuring data collected from the system. I leaned in and said to her, "Mamachka, I am going to be working here as a scientist." She grinned, beaming with pride. "Ah, that's marvelous, darling. Papachka is going to be so proud when he hears this." When we started walking back home, to the buses, it was already dark. I realized my mother's mood had suddenly dampened. She seemed to become quiet and fidgety, like something had deeply upset her. "Mamachka, is there something wrong?" My mother stared worriedly into blank space, then at me, then pointed to above the wooden dome of the visitors' center, her hand trembling. She stammered at first, then began to whisper. What she said next sends chills down my neck to this day. The bird, the flying creature I saw at Chernobyl, I just saw it flying around that dome. 9th story. This story was shared by you/4spooky5me. I think these mountains hold secrets. Today was the strangest day of my life. I wasn't sure where else to tell my story, but having been a long-time lurker, I figured I would make an account and relay it as best as I can. Let me start off by saying that I am a West Virginian, born and raised. I love my little state with every fabric of my being. I'm what you would call a northerner because I live right against the Pennsylvania border. Now, I know that when you think of West Virginia, you probably think of backwoods, inbred, bloodthirsty cannibals. In reality, our little state is very pleasant, and while there are some southern areas that even I wouldn't go to, most of it is rich with history and beautiful scenery. Wild and wonderful, our slogan and the best way to describe it. All that being said, here is the events of the past few days. I was on my way back from vacationing in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. I always take a week from work every winter and go down to do some fishing. A few buddies were with me, but they had decided to fly back rather than drive. It didn't bother me much. I have always found driving quite peaceful and I love the scenery. I had been driving close to 5 hours on I-77 when I reached Charleston, West Virginia, and from there caught I-79 for the home stretch of my journey. It was dark by the time I had reached Charleston, and I had been driving so long that I had started feeling drowsy enough to the point I didn't feel safe driving any longer. So I got off of the interstate and found a small little town called Gassaway, West Virginia, and a microtel to crash for the night. A thing that you have to understand about me is that I can be very spontaneous, adventurous, sometimes even downright reckless. That combined with a love for the outdoors can sometimes be a volatile combination. The next morning, I awoke to breathtaking views of the mountains and knew, without a doubt, that I would not miss this opportunity to go for a hike. I bundled up for the cold morning hike and set off from my hotel. Being an avid hiker, it wasn't uncommon for me to do 5 to 10 miles at a time, depending on weather, terrain, etc. Anyways, I had reached the peak of a small hill and noticed something odd. A field had opened up at the top, and every 10 yards or so, perfect circles had melted the snow away. There were 3 of them, perfect circles and in a straight line. It was the damnedest thing. I approached them with caution and was shocked when I was close enough to see why the snow had melted. Rather than frozen ground, there were grates, like you would see in a sewer. Even stranger, there was a horrible smell wafting up from them. This smell was not a natural smell, like a wet dog or a skunk, but rather an industrial smell, like an acidic solution. Needless to say, I left and made my way back down the slope fearing the worst. Sadly, it would get worse. Coming back down the mountain, I heard what sounded like a conversation happening just ahead of me, down the slope. I approached cautiously, and hid behind a small rock face and peered over. 3 men were in front of a cave entrance, standing beside a truck. 2 appeared military while the other seemed civilian. I could not make out what they were saying, but a forklift appeared from the cave carrying a crate. You could hear all manners of noises coming from the crate, scratching, thumps. It sounded like something thrashing, and then the screech happened. I don't think I will ever forget the sound I heard. The best way I can describe it would be to mix a hiss with the sound of someone who has just broken the surface of water in the first desperate gasp/gulp of air. I got the hell out of there. I made it back to my car without anything else occurring, but what I had seen was well enough. I had just gotten home and I immediately picked up my laptop to tell you guys my story. I don't really care if anyone believes me, and to be honest, I'll probably never tell anyone I know personally. I love my little state, but I have gained a new level of respect for it. I often forget how densely forested it is and how many secrets it can hold. 10th story. Injured cold on the phone. Over the last few months, calls from my wife have become odd. Several times, seemingly along no pattern, I have been receiving very strange calls from my wife. I handle our cell billing, so interestingly, I know for a fact that when I get these calls, even though they show as my wife's number, they are not originating from her number. I can't explain what I hear. The first few times it happened, I hung that shit up because it scared the shit out of me. You should understand the level of fear though, Reddit. I am hanging up on what could be my wife of 16 years in distress. But, the sounds I hear over that phone are so foreign and far else that my mind can scarcely comprehend. I imagine it's like hearing God's voice. And so the first few times it happened, I hung up and texted my wife a few times. You should note that my texts to her during these times just go to dead space, even when I have full bars. She does not receive them, and after a while, the little red exclamation by the text on my iPhone, and the whole text associated disappear. The best I can describe it is the call from Injured Cold from Mothman Prophecies. That odd sort of static that at the same time sounds like words that I somehow understand. On the 3rd time it happened I said fuck it, and listened to the static. I wish I hadn't. I can hardly hear another sound. It sounds like an old dial-up modem except it formulates words. Terrible words. I'm not even willing to tell you what the voice said, Reddit, but I'm hoping one of you has advice as to what this is, and what I can do. I know we're all supposed to assume this is real, frankly, just please help me. There is something actively messing with me. I truly hope that I somehow pissed off the phone or cable guy or something, but I doubt it. I'm an atheist and a skeptic, and I truly didn't think this kind of thing was possible a week ago. What do I do? Update tomorrow night, if only so I have somebody who doesn't think I'm crazy to tell about this. I'm a large alpha male, and I have never known this fear. Whatever it is, I don't stand a chance. God, I can feel it watching me now. I'm logging. I can't see my screen through the tears anyway. Thanks a lot for watching the video till the end. Subscribe to our channel Horror in Detail. Drop your opinions/suggestions in the comment section, and like the video as it helps with the YouTube algorithm.